The night air was heavy with rain, slicking the asphalt of Interstate 77 until the road shone like black glass. Woodrow Derenberger hunched forward in the driver's seat of his panel van, wipers beating in steady rhythm. It was November 2nd, 1966, the kind of Appalachian night where headlights struggled to cut through the mist. He was tired, thinking only of getting home to Mineral Wells after a long day of selling sewing machines. Then, the traffic ahead of him vanished. No brake lights. No cars. Only silence and the drum of rain. Woody blinked hard, gripping the wheel tighter. He told himself it was just the weather. Maybe the fog had swallowed up the tail lights. Yet deep in his chest unease pulled. The darkness ahead split. Something shimmered down from the clouds, lowering slowly into the median like a stage curtain parting. At first Woody thought it was a truck that had jackknifed across the highway. But as his van rolled closer, he realized it wasn't blocking the road, it was floating above it. A shape hovered there, impossibly still. Oval, bulbous at the ends, narrowing in the center, like the glass globe of a kerosene lamp, he would later say. Metallic, but not gleaming. It seemed to swallow the weak glow of his headlights rather than reflect it. His heart kicked. His foot pressed the brake, hard enough to make the van fishtail slightly. For a second, he thought of slamming it into reverse and tearing back toward Parkersburg. But his limbs felt heavy, as if the air itself had grown thick. The craft drifted across the highway and came to a stop just ahead of him. And then, with an elegance that felt deliberate, a side panel slid open. From the shadows within, a figure stepped out. Tall. Broad-shouldered. A man, but not quite. His coat glistened with a sheen darker than the night sky. His hair was combed back neatly, his skin a strange olive tone, and on his face was a smile that never shifted, never faltered. And Woody knew, without hearing a word spoken, that this figure was smiling directly into his mind. Woody's van coasted to a reluctant stop. The rain tapped at the windshield like impatient fingers. He tried to will his hand to the gearshift, but his arm refused to move. The figure stood not more than a dozen yards away, centered in his headlights, smiling as though the downpour did not touch him at all. The man's lips did not move, yet Woody heard a voice inside his skull. Clear. Calm. Without accent. Be not frightened. We mean you no harm. The words vibrated inside his head, as if echoing off the walls of thought itself. His pulse hammered in his throat. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the voice was soothing, unnervingly so. It carried the weight of absolute conviction, as though resistance were unnecessary, almost impolite. The figure began walking toward the van. Each step seemed deliberate, measured. Woody noticed the coat now, glossy, dark blue, almost metallic when the headlights struck it. It clung to the man's frame, not fabric but something heavier, alien in cut. The stranger's arms were folded, a gesture that might have been casual if not for the way his eyes never left Woody's face. When the man reached the passenger side window, he leaned slightly forward. Rain rolled off his shoulders without soaking the coat. That smile remained fixed, unblinking. Woody's window cranked itself down as if compelled by invisible hands. The man's voice pressed into his mind again. I am Cold. Indrid Cold. The name settled like frost along Woody's spine. He opened his mouth, but his voice snagged in his throat. He finally managed a whisper. What do you want from me? The smile did not widen, did not falter. It remained impossibly serene. Only to talk. From the road behind, Woody caught sight of something impossible. The craft, that strange kerosene lamp shape, had glided silently across the highway and now hovered above the tree line. It bobbed slightly, as though waiting for its passenger to finish. Cold gestured toward the passenger seat. May I sit? Before Woody could answer, the latch clicked. The door swung open. And in the next instant, the grinning man slid inside the van, folding himself neatly onto the seat as though he had always belonged there. The rain fell harder, but inside, a silence deeper than the storm pressed in. The stranger settled into the seat with a fluid motion, folding his long legs neatly, hands still resting across his lap. He did not fumble with the door, nor with the seatbelt. It was as if he understood the interior of the van better than Woody himself. The air around him carried no smell of wet earth or rain-soaked cloth. Instead, there was a faint sharpness, like ozone after a lightning strike. Woody's throat felt parched. He kept his hands clamped on the steering wheel, knuckles pale, every muscle poised to snap. Yet he could not ignore the calm seeping from the man beside him, like invisible threads weaving into his thoughts. Cold's head turned slightly, eyes catching the glow of the dashboard. They seemed too reflective, too steady. His voice sounded again, not aloud, but within. "Why are you afraid? We wish only communication," Woody croaked out. You stepped out of that thing. That machine." The smile deepened by the smallest fraction, though the lips never parted. "Yes. We move as you move. Travel is simple when one understands the way." Woody shivered. His hands twitched toward the keys, but before he could make a move, the thought pressed in again, firmer now. "Do not be alarmed. We intend no injury. We are searching, for knowledge, for friendship. Tell your people, we mean you no harm." The words wrapped around his panic like a blanket. Woody's breath slowed against his will. His mind kept circling back to one impossible detail. The voice knew his thoughts before he formed them, answering fears as quickly as they sparked. Finally, he forced himself to ask, "Why me?" For the first time, Indrid Cold turned his head fully, eyes locking onto Woody's. They were not glowing, not alien, but too steady, too unwavering. The smile carved across his face remained a mask of perfect assurance. "Because you stopped when others did not." The rain eased slightly, a hush falling over the cab of the van. Woody realized with a chill that not a single car had passed since the encounter began. The highway, usually alive with trucks at this hour, was utterly empty, as if the world itself had been paused. Cold leaned closer, and Woody felt the pressure of a thought that was not his own. "We will meet again." And then, as swiftly as he had entered, the man's form flickered. The seat beside Woody sagged for an instant as though occupied, then lightened. Cold was gone. But the smile, Woody swore, still lingered in the corner of his mind. The rest of the drive home blurred into fragments. Woody's mind replayed the scene in jagged loops: the floating craft, the smiling man, the silence on the road. When he pulled into his driveway, his wife noticed immediately. He stumbled inside, pale, trembling, rainwater clinging to his coat as though he'd walked through a storm without noticing. "What happened?" she demanded. But Woody's words tumbled out half-formed, as if retelling only deepened his confusion. By the next day, his story had spilled beyond the living room. Friends urged him to go public. A local radio station got word first. Then WTP-TV in Parkersburg invited him to sit under the studio lights. On November 3rd, the cameras rolled. Woody sat stiff in the chair, the host leaning in with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. The harsh lighting made him sweat. He recounted the craft. It was shaped like an old kerosene lamp chimney, hovering about 40 to 75 feet above the highway. The man. He said his name was Cold. Indrid Cold. He spoke directly into my mind. The words sounded unreal even to his own ears. Yet he stuck to them. He insisted the man had promised no harm, only conversation, only the exchange of ideas. The anchor's eyebrows crept higher with each sentence. At home, viewers leaned closer to their black and white sets. Housewives, factory workers, retired miners, all watching a sewing machine salesman speak of spacemen with the same earnestness as describing a neighbor. When the broadcast ended, the phone lines lit up. Some callers laughed, some cursed, but others spoke quietly of things they had seen too. Shadows in the sky. Men in dark suits. Lights dipping low over the Ohio River. And that night, Woody lay awake in bed, unable to shake the feeling that he was no longer merely a witness. He had become a vessel, carrying Cold's smile into every living room, planting it in every watching mind. The day after the WTP broadcast, Woody couldn't step outside without feeling eyes on him. At the gas station, two men pumping fuel went silent when he pulled up. At the diner, forks paused midair. Whispers clung to the edges of every room. Some nodded politely, curious, but others smirked openly. "There goes the spaceman," one teenager muttered loud enough for Woody to hear. Yet others approached him quietly. An old woman pressed his hand with trembling fingers. "I saw something too," she whispered. "Lights over the river. Don't let them make you out a fool." The strange part, Woody began noticing the roads themselves seemed emptier. Where were the endless trucks? The traffic he was used to? Now the interstate seemed hushed at odd hours, as if it were waiting for him. He would drive stretches without passing another soul, until his nerves crawled with the sense of being shadowed. And sure enough, one night, barely a week after the first encounter, the silence broke. His headlights caught a figure standing by the guardrail. Same dark coat. Same posture. Same smile glinting through the drizzle. Woody's chest constricted. He slowed, half praying the image would dissolve into fog. But the man lifted one hand in greeting, palm outward, and the thought pressed into Woody's mind as if no time had passed. "Good evening, my friend." Cold stepped into the road with the patience of someone who knew no car would dare strike him. His presence warped the night, bending Woody's fear until it felt like awe. The craft was there too, hovering above the trees like a silent sentinel, its lantern shape bobbing in the mist. Woody's grip trembled on the wheel. He thought of flooring the gas, fleeing, pretending none of this had ever happened. But before he could act, the voice was inside him again, warm and immovable. "Drive us somewhere quiet. We must speak where no others listen." The road stretched before him, empty, waiting. Woody knew with bone-deep certainty he would obey. Parkersburg wasn't the only place buzzing. Downriver in Point Pleasant, the newspapers had already been whispering about a winged figure seen near the TNT plant. Couples parking on backroads spoke of red eyes flashing from the tree line. Hunters swore something the size of a man, but broader, darker, had taken flight above the Ohio. Now, Woody's story of a smiling man from the stars landed right on top of those tales. Some locals muttered it was all the same thing, monsters, spacemen, government spooks. Others said Cold was somehow behind the winged creature. The lines blurred with every retelling. At the grocery store, a man in a flat cap leaned close to Woody. "You've seen the red eyes too, haven't you? Don't lie." His breath smelled of tobacco and fear. When Woody denied it, the man only nodded as though that was proof enough. But the strangest thing was the men in cars. Woody began noticing black sedans idling on corners when he left his house. Their windows were rolled up, faces inside indistinct. Once, he caught sight of two figures in suits watching him from across a parking lot, too tall, too still. He blinked, and they seemed to vanish between one heartbeat and the next. That night, Cold returned again. Woody had just locked the shop when he felt the pressure in his mind, like the weight of a hand pressing gently but firmly against his thoughts. "You are watched. Be careful." He froze. "By who?" he whispered into the empty alley. The answer came, calm as ever. "Not us." And then, in the reflection of the glass door, Woody saw it, over his own shoulder, a pale face grinning from the dark. He spun around, heart leaping into his throat, but the alley was empty. Only trash bins and the hiss of a distant train. Still, the feeling lingered. Cold's smile now existed in two forms: the stranger who claimed friendship, and something else, warped and uncanny, bleeding into the shadows around town. The stories of winged beasts, the silent black cars, the faceless men, all of it was starting to knot together. And Woody was trapped at the center of the tangle. The second meeting stretched into minutes Woody could not measure. Cold's words weren't words at all but steady currents pushing through his skull. The storm outside the van hushed as though every raindrop had been ordered to wait. "You are curious. You are afraid. These are useful things," Cold told him. "They will help you remember." Woody tried to ask what he was supposed to remember, but the thought clamped shut in his throat. Cold only tilted his head, the permanent smile sharpening against the dim light. When the figure finally stepped back into the road, the craft overhead shifted with eerie grace, aligning like a predator circling its chosen ground. The silence pressed in until Woody realized, again, that not a single car had passed since Cold arrived. The entire interstate lay frozen in unnatural pause. And then the figure was gone, swallowed by the craft's shadow. The sound of the rain snapped back like someone had lifted a needle off a record and set it down again. Headlights appeared in the distance. A truck roared past, horn blaring, as if the world had resumed on cue. Woody drove home half-numb, fighting the impulse to pull over and vomit into the ditch. By morning, his hands still shook when he poured his coffee. But he wasn't the only one rattled. In Point Pleasant, 2 firefighters told the local paper about seeing a large bird-like man soaring over the TNT plant. Teenagers claimed something had chased their car across the bridge, wings beating against the roof. And every story somehow circled back to Woody's, his name appearing in the same paragraphs as the monsters. The whispers grew, the smiling man, the winged man, the silent men in black cars. Maybe they were all agents of the same hidden force. Maybe Indrid Cold was just the polite mask of something vast and faceless that had settled over the valley. And late that night, as Woody lay awake, he felt it again, a tug in the corners of his mind. Cold wasn't gone. He was waiting. 2 nights after Woody's second encounter, Point Pleasant firefighters Paul Yoder and Benjamin Enoch stood at the edge of the TNT plant, flashlights slicing through the overgrown concrete bunkers. The whistle of crickets stopped all at once, as though the night had drawn breath. Above them, something passed between the trees. Enormous, silent. They caught a glimpse of wide wings blotting out the stars. Both men swore it was no heron or owl, too broad, too deliberate. And when it tilted in the air, they saw eyes glowing red like coals. But what chilled them most was not the wings. It was the smile. For just a fraction of a second, they swore they saw a mouth, stretched too wide, watching them as it wheeled away into the dark. Miles upriver, a teenage couple sat parked on a back road, engine idling low. The boy leaned in, trying for a kiss, when the girl stiffened. A man stood by the driver's window, inches from her face. She screamed, scrambling back, but the figure only leaned closer. His lips did not move. Still, she heard the words. "Be not frightened. We mean you no harm." The boy shoved the door open, but there was no one there. Only rain on the gravel and the empty woods beyond. The girl refused to go home alone. She begged him to drive her to her parents' house, shaking the whole way. Later, she would insist she still felt that smile in her thoughts, replaying like a broken tune she couldn't stop humming. Word spread. People whispered that Cold had followers, or copies, or shadows that wore his face. Others wondered if Mothman was only another mask, the same thing dressed in wings instead of a coat. And Woody, hearing these stories, felt a sick twist of recognition. He hadn't spoken of the way the highways fell empty whenever Cold appeared. He hadn't told anyone how the man's voice bled straight into his skull. Yet here were strangers describing the same smile, the same impossible voice. Cold wasn't visiting just him anymore. Cold was visiting everyone. By mid-November, the valley felt different. Nights no longer belonged to crickets and cicadas. They belonged to silence that pressed against the ears. Conversations in diners bent always toward the same topic. Did you see him? Did you hear it in your head? Was it the bird thing or the man? Stories overlapped until no one could tell where Mothman ended and Cold began. At the Silver Bridge Tavern, a trucker swore a smiling man had stepped out of the trees on Route 7, only to vanish when the headlights hit. "He was waiting for me," the trucker insisted. "Like he knew I'd be there." A nurse driving home from the night shift said she spotted a lantern-shaped light hovering above the river. She slowed, hypnotized, until a voice as clear as her own thoughts whispered, "Drive safely. Be calm." She nearly drove off the road in terror. Even the children whispered about him. At a school playground, a group of kids dared each other to chant his name, Indrid Cold, by the swing set after dark. One boy swore he felt laughter brushing against his mind, tickling but cruel, until he screamed for his mother. Meanwhile, Woody could hardly walk through town without catching sidelong glances. To some, he was a prophet. To others, a liar. But the look that unsettled him most came from those who leaned in close, lowering their voices. He came to me too. It was happening everywhere. Strangers sharing the same smile, the same words. Some described Cold as tall, others said his face was smooth as wax, still others swore they had seen him glide rather than walk. Yet every account carried the same refrain: be not frightened. We mean you no harm. But harm was already done. Fear had taken root. The valley itself seemed to flinch at nightfall, doors locked earlier, radios tuned low to catch the latest whisper of where Cold had walked last. And Woody, sitting in his kitchen with the lights turned low, realized something terrifying. The more people spoke his name, the stronger the presence seemed to grow. As though Cold was fed not by belief, but by attention. It began with whispers in living rooms, but soon whole gatherings claimed the same experience. At a church service in Point Pleasant, the congregation paused mid-hymn when the lights flickered. A dozen people later swore they saw a tall man standing in the back pew, hands folded neatly across his coat. The preacher tried to continue, but his voice faltered when half the room heard the same message inside their heads. Peace be with you. No lips moved. Yet the words hummed through every skull, layered on top of the organ's notes. Mothers clutched children. Men stared at the doors, wondering how the figure had slipped away without a sound. At the Mason County Fairgrounds, a group of teenagers snuck onto the empty lot to drink beer. Laughter turned to shrieks when one boy pointed to the bleachers. A man sat there in the dark, grinning, legs crossed as if watching a private show. They scattered, bottles smashing on the asphalt, but each insisted later they could still hear him laughing after they'd fled. Even the police weren't immune. A deputy on patrol reported stopping to check a stalled car on Route 62. But when he approached, the driver's seat was empty, until he blinked, and there sat a man in a glossy coat, smiling. The deputy drew his weapon, but the figure only nodded. The gun felt suddenly impossible to lift, his arm leaden. Then came the voice. There is no need for this. The deputy left the car untouched, trembling as he drove away. He refused to put the incident in his report. By now, the valley was divided. Skeptics scoffed, but even they avoided the backroads after dark. Believers gathered in hushed circles, trading stories like holy scripture. And through it all, Cold's name spread from mouth to mouth, until even children on schoolyards spoke it with a mixture of fear and awe. Woody could feel it tightening like a net. Cold was no longer visiting him alone. He was visiting everyone, multiplying like an echo that would not fade. And each time, the message was the same: be not frightened. We mean you no harm. But the more often those words were spoken, the less anyone believed them. The sightings did not stop, but they changed. They became quieter, stranger, like the difference between a rumor shouted in a crowd and a whisper in your ear. A young mother in Gallipolis swore she woke to find a man sitting at the end of her bed. His coat gleamed faintly in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. She couldn't move, couldn't scream, but she heard him just the same. Your child is safe. Sleep in peace. When she bolted upright, gasping, the figure was gone. Yet her infant was already awake in the crib, eyes fixed on the dark corner of the room, cooing as if greeting a friend. Two mechanics in Parkersburg locked up their garage late one evening. As they pulled the rolling door down, they caught sight of a man standing across the street. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched them with that smile. When one shouted, "What do you want?" the answer didn't come from the street, it came from inside their skulls. "To see you." The door slammed shut with a rattle that echoed longer than it should have. They stayed inside until dawn, too afraid to look out again. For Woody, the intimacy was worse. He would be alone in his shop, scribbling numbers, when he felt the air thicken. And then Cold's voice would press into him without warning. "You are tired. Rest." The pen slipped from his hand, ink blotting the page. His eyelids sagged as if drugged, only to snap open in terror. He would look around wildly, knowing he was alone, but never truly believing it. At night, His wife began waking to find Woody sitting rigid in bed, staring into the dark. "Is he here again?" she whispered once. Woody couldn't answer. He didn't want to give the thought shape by speaking it aloud. But the truth was clear: Cold no longer needed highways or craft or staged encounters. He was inside people's homes, their workplaces, their minds. He was choosing them one by one, and leaving behind the same impossible smile, etched not on faces but on memory itself. Woody's shop no longer felt like his. He would set out bolts of fabric, arrange sewing machines in neat rows, but his attention scattered like leaves in wind. Every time he leaned over the counter, he felt eyes on the back of his neck. Every time he glanced at the glass door, he half expected to see that glossy coat just beyond the reflection. The worst part was not the sightings. It was the anticipation. He began sleeping in fits, jolting awake with his heart pounding. Sometimes he swore the mattress dipped beside him, as though someone else had sat down in the dark. His wife whispered, "Woody, what is it?" But he only shook his head, unwilling to feed the dread with words. Cold's voice didn't wait for highways anymore. It seeped into him at random, while pouring coffee, while brushing his teeth, while buttoning his shirt. Calm phrases with no beginning or end. "You are watched. Be calm. We will speak again." Simple, meaningless on the surface. Yet every utterance scraped at Woody's sanity, because it proved one thing: he was never alone. At work, customers noticed his hands tremble on receipts. He dropped tools, lost track of simple instructions. His boss finally asked if he was drinking. Woody laughed too loudly, then fell silent. He couldn't explain the truth without sounding mad. But silence carried its own poison. The less he told, the more he carried alone. And the more he carried, the clearer Cold's presence became, filling the quiet, humming like static under every thought. Sometimes Woody wondered if the smile had moved inside him. When he looked in the mirror, he swore the corners of his mouth tugged upward against his will. One night, after lying awake for hours, he whispered into the dark, "What do you want from me?" The answer came instantly, without hesitation. "Everything." The days blurred together until Woody could no longer trust the clock. He would swear he had just woken, only to find the hands racing toward dusk. His wife insisted he had stood at the kitchen window for hours, unmoving, staring into the rain. Woody had no memory of it. Cold's voice had shifted. It was no longer only calm reassurances. Now it asked questions. "Why do you resist? Do you not feel chosen? Would you rather be forgotten?" The words arrived not in sentences, but in currents of thought that bent Woody's own. He would begin to answer aloud before realizing no one was there. At night, dreams folded into waking. He would dream of standing on the highway, rain on his face, Cold smiling just beyond the headlights. Then he would blink, and find himself actually standing in his driveway, barefoot, pajamas soaked through, gravel cutting his soles. His wife would drag him back inside, pleading, "You're scaring me, Woody." The scariest part was the laughter. Not out loud, but in his head, bubbling at the edges of his thoughts. Sometimes, when he tried to count change for a customer, it burst through like static, forcing him to swallow a shudder. A smile tugged at his lips while his hands shook uncontrollably. He began scribbling notes in the margins of receipts, desperate to anchor himself. "I am Woody. I am here. It is November. This is real." But in the morning, the words looked wrong, scrawled at angles he didn't remember writing. Once, he found a message in his own handwriting: "You are cold now." He didn't remember writing it. The mirror was worst of all. Each morning he caught himself staring too long at his reflection, convinced the figure in the glass smiled a fraction of a second before he did. He covered the mirror with a towel, but still felt watched. Cold was no longer visiting him. Cold was inhabiting him. Woody stopped correcting people when they asked how he was. He would nod, lips twitching at the edges, and let the silence answer for him. He didn't notice how long he stared before blinking. Didn't notice how his wife avoided his gaze now, how she touched his shoulder and flinched as though expecting a shock. Inside, he felt himself thinning. Thoughts no longer belonged wholly to him. They arrived already bent, already smiling. When he tried to remember childhood moments, fishing with his father, summer nights chasing fireflies, the images were wrong. The river ran darker. The sky had no stars. His father's face stretched into a grin that never ended. The voice was constant now. Not pressing in, but rising from within. You are becoming. You are remembering. At first he argued. He shouted into the mirror, clutching his hair until his scalp burned. I'm Woody Derenberger. I'm a man, not. But even then, the reflection seemed patient, lips quirking upward before his own caught up. And the arguments grew shorter. His protests weaker. Eventually, he stopped speaking them aloud. Neighbors noticed. A friend stopped by the shop one afternoon, asking about a sewing machine. Woody smiled, too wide, too long, and the man backed out of the store without another word. Rumors spread that Woody was catching it. Whatever it was, the same thing stalking Point Pleasant at night. But Woody no longer cared. Caring felt like an old suit that no longer fit. What mattered was the strange stillness that came whenever he surrendered. He would sit in his chair and let the voice guide his thoughts like a river carrying driftwood. Hours passed in silence, but it wasn't silence, it was communion. When he finally spoke again, the words startled his wife so badly she dropped a glass. I am not alone, he told her softly, eyes never leaving the dark window. I am cold. For days Woody barely spoke, moving through the house with a mechanical patience. His wife tried to draw him out, pressing him with small questions, about the shop, about the weather, about anything to anchor him. He answered with a smile, the same curve of lips that never faltered. But one night, as she leaned close and whispered, Woody, please, I need you to look at me. Something broke through. His smile faltered. For an instant his eyes darted like a trapped animal's, wide and pleading. I'm still here, he rasped, voice raw from disuse. Don't let him take me. It was the first thing he had said with urgency in weeks. His wife clasped his hands, tears streaming, but even as she squeezed them, she felt his grip slacken, his expression smoothing back into that dreadful calm. Cold's voice rose inside him like a tide, drowning the moment. Be not frightened. We mean you no harm. Yet the ember smoldered. Woody began scrawling words in notebooks late at night, filling pages with jagged handwriting. Most were nonsense, spirals, rows of grinning faces, repeated lines like we remember, but hidden among them were desperate pleas. I am Woody. Please find me. Please don't forget me. He hid the notebooks beneath floorboards, terrified that even Cold might see them through his eyes. During the day, when customers passed through, he caught glimpses of his reflection in the shop window, and sometimes, just sometimes, the man staring back was not smiling. It gave him hope. The smallest flicker, but real. At night, though, when the voice whispered, Everything you were is ours now, Woody clenched his fists, forcing the words into his head like a shield. Not everything. Not yet. The ember glowed faintly in the dark. A shred of resistance. The last true thing that was his alone. The notebooks multiplied. Woody filled them with frantic scribbles, words scrawled at angles, diagrams that made no sense even to him in the morning. His wife begged him to stop, to sleep, but he could not. Writing was the only way to feel the ember still burned inside. But Cold noticed. Woody felt it in the pressure behind his eyes, a disapproving hum that pulsed like a migraine. His pen froze mid-sentence. His hand trembled until the letters smeared into ink blots. And then the voice came, smoother than silk, heavier than stone. Why do you cling? There is no need. You are already becoming. Woody slammed the notebook shut, heart hammering. He whispered into his hands, Not all of me. Not yet. Cold laughed, not aloud, but inside him, vibrating against his ribs. Resistance is memory. Memory is weakness. We will remove it. The days worsened. He caught himself humming melodies he didn't know, strange lilting tunes that left his throat dry. His reflection smiled before he did. His daughter, visiting with groceries, whispered to her mother afterward. His face, it doesn't look like Dad's anymore. That night, Woody tried to pray. He clasped his hands, bowed his head, forced the words, "Please, God, don't let me forget myself." The answer came instantly, cruelly. "Even your prayers are mine." The ember sputtered. He still felt it, small, insistent, but now it burned under Cold's weight like a coal beneath an avalanche. Each flicker only seemed to amuse the presence further, as though Cold allowed it to remain for sport. Sometimes Woody thought he could hear the smile stretching inside his skull, pulling wider and wider, until it swallowed every other thought whole. He pressed his hands against his face, desperate to feel human warmth. But his own skin felt foreign now, too cold, too steady, as if it belonged to someone else. And when he whispered his own name, it no longer sounded right. At first, the neighbors only whispered. They told each other that Woody seemed different. That he smiled too long, too still, even when the conversation didn't call for it. One woman swore she saw him standing on his porch for hours, staring at nothing, rain soaking through his clothes without him noticing. Soon, whispers turned to avoidance. Children stopped cutting across his yard. Old friends crossed the street rather than meet his eyes. At church, pews shifted subtly away, as though distance could shield them from whatever clung to him. But it was his family that felt the change most. His wife tried to keep up appearances, dinners, small talk, the comfort of routine. But every night she lay awake beside him, shivering. He no longer breathed evenly in his sleep. His chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, as if timed to something other than rest. And when she turned toward him in the dark, his eyes were sometimes open, glinting faintly, staring at the ceiling with that fixed half-smile. His daughter visited less and less. Once, she confronted him, clutching his arm. "Daddy, please, you're scaring us. This isn't you." For the briefest instant, his lips twitched downward, and Woody surfaced, eyes wide with pain. "I don't want this," he rasped. But then the voice pressed through, smoothing his expression, flattening his tone. "We mean you no harm." The words weren't his. They never were anymore. His daughter backed away, tears filling her eyes. "Don't say that," she whispered. "Don't you dare say that to me." By the time she left, Woody sat alone at the table, notebook open before him. His handwriting sprawled across the page, jagged, broken. He stared at the words without blinking. "I am Woody. Please remember me." But even as he read them, his lips curled upward, steady and unrelenting. The smile didn't care what the words said. And his family, once his tether to the world, now looked at him as though the man they loved had already gone. The first stones were words. In the bar, in the grocery aisles, in the pews after service, his neighbors muttered openly now. "He brought it here. That smiling man follows him. If Woody would just leave, maybe the rest of us could sleep again." The whispers grew teeth. Some claimed they'd seen lights over Woody's roof at night. Others said they caught him wandering the roads, humming to himself, shadows stretching too long in the headlights. A story spread that he had laughed at a funeral, though no one agreed whose. One morning, Woody found his shop window cracked, a jagged starburst spreading across the glass. A note had been shoved under the door in blocky letters: "Keep your friends to yourself." At church, when he reached for the hymnal, the man beside him stood and moved away. Later, the preacher avoided Woody's gaze entirely. His sermon pointed at sin that welcomes darkness into our homes. Heads turned. Woody sat rigid, lips pressed in a line that wanted so badly to curve upward. His wife tried to shield him, but even she began to shrink under the weight of stares. She whispered, "We might have to move, Woody. Just until this blows over." But he only smiled. Not by choice. Not anymore. The breaking point came at the diner. A group of young men cornered him as he tried to pay his bill. One shoved him hard against the counter. "You're the reason we can't sleep. You brought him here." Woody's hands trembled. For one brief moment he surfaced, eyes darting, lips twitching downward. "Please," he whispered. "It's not me." Then the voice flooded through him, louder than his own thoughts. Be not frightened. We mean you no harm. The words spilled from his mouth in perfect calm. The diner went silent. Every head turned. And the young men who had cornered him backed away, pale and shaking, as if they just looked into something not entirely human. By nightfall, the whole town knew. Woody wasn't just a witness anymore. He was the mouthpiece of the thing they feared most. It was only a matter of time before whispers became shouts. On a cold evening near the end of November, Woody walked back from closing his shop to find a cluster waiting at the edge of his yard. Neighbors, men from the diner, even a few strangers who had come just to see the spaceman's friend. Lanterns bobbed in the dark, their light catching faces twisted in anger and fear. Leave this place, Woody, someone called. You've brought him on us all. Another spat. He raised his hands, trembling. I never asked for this. I never. The smile cut him off, sliding across his face as if it belonged to someone else. And then the voice filled him, louder than his fear, spilling through his lips for all to hear. Be not frightened. We mean you no harm. The crowd recoiled as though struck. A child began to wail. One man hurled a stone that glanced off the porch rail. Another lifted a shotgun. His wife screamed from the doorway. Stop! Please, he's sick! But even her voice was drowned by the muttering tide, the chant rising, Get him out! Get him out! Woody tried to speak his own words, to shout I am Woody. But his throat locked. Only that steady refrain emerged, smooth and terrible. We mean you no harm. The shotgun fired into the air. The crowd scattered in panic, lanterns swinging wildly. For a moment, silence returned, thick, suffocating. And above them, something shifted in the clouds. A dim, lantern-shaped glow hovered silently over the tree-line. Every head tilted upward. The mob froze, fear cutting deeper than rage. And as the glow pulsed once, twice, then slipped back into the night, no one dared move. When the crowd finally dispersed, Woody stood alone on the porch, lantern light fading from his yard. His wife sobbed behind him, begging him to come inside. But Woody only smiled into the dark, as though waiting for someone else to speak through him. The days after the confrontation passed in uneasy quiet. No one spoke to Woody. No one came near the shop. His wife and daughter packed bags, whispering that they might stay with relatives. Woody only nodded, lips curved in that same unreadable line. Inside, the ember still flickered, faint and stubborn. He scrawled it into his final notebook. I am Woody. Please remember me. But the voice drowned it almost immediately. Memory fades. Only presence remains. You are cold. One evening, he walked out to the porch alone. The air was still, heavy with November frost. And there it was again, the kerosene lamp craft hovering low, silent as thought. A figure stood in the yard, hands folded, smiling. Whether it was another vision or the truth didn't matter. Woody stepped forward, the smile already fixed across his face. His wife's cry carried from inside, thin and hopeless. Woody, don't! He turned once, just long enough for her to see the flicker in his eyes, the last shred of him, before it dimmed for good. When the neighbors peered out their windows later, they saw nothing but an empty porch. No man. No figure. No craft. Only frost creeping across the wood. But in the weeks that followed, they whispered of hearing his voice in the quiet moments, calm, steady, always the same words. Be not frightened. We mean you no harm. Yet the more they heard it, the less they believed. And long after Woody was gone, the valley still shuddered at night, every shadow carrying the trace of a smile that never ended.